Members of the City Council, please attend a call meeting of the City Council to be held in the 6th floor conference room, 801 Crawford Street, 5 p.m. Tuesday, April 28, 2015, for the purpose of a public work session. In addition, you may consider a motion to go into closed meeting by order of the mayor. Mr. Cherry?
Here.
Dr. Edmonds?
Here.
Mr. Meeks? Mr. Moody?
Here.
Ms. Simmons?
Yes, here.
Dr. Whitaker?
Present.
Mayor Wright?
Here. Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, good afternoon. Would you like to start with the CDBG
Yeah,
thing
let's
first?
do that first. Yes, sir.
Okay. We're going to move the second item up first, which is the CDBG and Home FY16 Annual Action Plan, and Bob's going to give you a presentation on that. Just as an overview, the Annual Action Plan is a requirement by HUD that we as an entitlement city submit each year by May 15th. And that's a condition for receiving the Community Development Block Grant, CDBG funds, and the Home Investment Partnership funds, or HOME funds. And as you know, these are pots of federal money that the city's been receiving for many years. And so this action plan proposes to HUD how we will allocate those funds, how we will spend them in the upcoming year. And it's on your agenda tonight as a public hearing, and so we wanted to give you a briefing of what's in there at this point and before we have the public hearing, and then ultimately an adoption at your next council
Now, the
meeting.
federal funding, is that number decreasing?
Yes, it is.
They talk every year about that piece shrinking.
We'll show you that.
Okay, very good.
Okay. Okay. Good evening, Mayor Wright, Vice Mayor Simmons, members of the council. I know you have a lot on your plate tonight, so I'll try to go relatively quickly through this, but I'll make sure if you have any questions, need any additional information. I think Brandon already covered, if you recall last year, the 5-year consolidated plan was adopted by council, and we've set in motion the 5-year annual action plans. This is year 2 on the annual action plan, designed to implement the goals of the consolidated plan. A little quick historical perspective, as you can see there. Since the city's been receiving CDBG funding since 1974, home program funds since 1992, and as answer your question, Mayor, you can see the funds have been decreasing every year over the last 5 years. The funding in 2010, as an example, is at 1.7. Current year was 1.4, and you'll see in the projected year for 2016, it's been decreased again. So we are on a, even though it's slight, it's still a declining funding. Again, this is the goals. I won't have to read all this to you, but it's all in your package there, what the goals were of the consolidated plan. I think the one we'll talk about here is going to be some neighborhood sustainability issues. I think something you moved into with the consolidated plan last year. These come out of the city's comprehensive plan. They come from the statutory requirements of the programs and from council's priorities. Again, these are the 5-year priorities out of your consolidated plan. I think you all have copies of that as well, so I won't go through all of those. But you can see the support neighborhoods with improved infrastructure, facilities, services, and reduced blight. That was sort of the targeted item that we started moving into last year with redirecting the funds that way, as opposed to being more involved in real estate acquisitions and the like. Again, purpose of the CDBG program. You can see it's suitable living environment, viable urban communities. This is really targeted to help low and moderate income residents move forward with their lives and live in a better environment, have better economic development opportunities, better public services, things of that nature. So proposed for 2016, our entitlement is 1.387. You see that's a slight decrease again from the current year. We have some projected program income. That's revenue the city receives from the TCC parking lot lease. It's kind of an annual bit of money, so that gets added in. Over the course of the year, there's some adjustments made to the funding because there are some additional funds that come in from property sales, things of that nature. But going into the budgeting process, this is what you have to work with.
Excuse me, did you say TCC parking lot?
Right.
Okay.
It's the downtown TCC campus. There's a parking lot that they pay parking fees for. 4 primary categories we put these CDBG funds in: housing programs, public services, public facilities improvements, and then the administrative and planning part of the process. And that's the 1.43 million. Again, this is what's been put together. Council obviously has the ability to take a look at this if you'd like to make some modifications and adjustments. We have $100,000 projected to go into housing rehab assistance. This is for seniors, basically minor rehab, maybe $5,000 for accessibility, minor home type improvements. This isn't like a major overhaul of a house. This would be targeted. And in this year's proposal, I'll be working with a STOP organization, a regional organization that would do this, and we would project about 15 homeowners would be eligible for
Ramps and things like that.
Exactly. Or any other minor
Who selects
improvements,
the homeowners?
Excuse me?
Who selects them?
The selection process, Jeff? I'm going to ask Jeff Crimer over here on that.
People will advertise the program, people will apply, it'll be, income-based, and then first come, first served, depending on, them meeting all the qualifications.
Is it widely advertised on the criteria?
Yeah, this is the first year we'll be doing this with STOP, but that'll be our intent. We'll try to balance it so that we don't we only have $100,000 in here. We don't, there's no way we're going to serve hundreds of people with this. So we want to make sure that we get the word out, but not so that we're overwhelming with applicants. We can look at next year, if there is a significantly greater need, we could fund more to it in future years.
So process-wise, Bob, go back to the other screen. Could you just talk about how do we come up with the allocations or the breakdowns with where we're going to spend money? What is our internal process that we utilize to be able to say this is where we ought to be doing this, and when we...
Okay, well, you have the categorical breakdowns, which have some percentage limitations that are applied by HUD regulation. We basically will go out with notices and advertising to the public. If an agencies, nonprofit agencies, city agencies, to submit applications for potential funding. So the normal process is that would come in through that process, and then those applicants are then compiled. That's the best way to put that. They'll all be compiled, and then there's a committee that kind of goes through and basically, I won't say allocates, but places them in the right category. Mm-hmm. And so we'll see as we go through this year. There's only a couple of instances where funding is not being recommended where it was applied for. One of those was $1 million total project cost. Obviously, with our limited amount of funding, somebody wants to come in and look for $1 million of CDBG funding. That's just not a viable kind of project. And we also had a $600,000 internal request from Parks and Recreation that, on top of some of the other Parks and Rec, primarily you'll see in the Pines. There just wasn't enough funding to do additional Parks and Rec on top of that. But that's the process. So we put that all together and package up, and we can bring to council anything you want to see from what was submitted. Very simple process. Basically, weren't really overwhelmed with a lot of people putting in requests. And I think you're going to see that as the funding continues to decline. A lot of people's needs just can't be met through the funding availability through CDBG. So,
I think we do need visibility on where it's going and who.
Yeah.
That'd be very good. And I know, before you carry on, I know we had some CDGB money allocated on Frederick Boulevard coming from the interstate to where we are with Kroger and all that. What happened in that whole piece?
Well, the piece that was in there for the landscape, you see that piece has been constructed.
Yeah, we messed that all up with the weeds we put in, but I'm talking about the medium strip. I thought we were going to do the medium strip put trees and all that in.
Well, the medium strip has been landscaped. I think as far as I'm aware, the landscaping plan has been installed. I'd have to ask James, if there's something missing. There's a house that's in that quarter that the city has acquired, which will be demolished. Some additional landscaping. That was an acquisition from last year. You may recall, there was a hole in the donut, so to speak, a gap in that quarter out there, and so that property, the owner was, the property was purchased. They were moved. They had a tenant that was moved, City has acquired the property. We're in the process now of moving to demolish the house and get the landscaping completed in there. That project is moving towards completion.
Now, what about the paving? Is that part of the CDBG money? I know we promised Kroger and the rest of them, once we got done with everything there, with Wawa and all, we were gonna pave both sides of that. I think we did just one side, the Kroger side, but I think we're supposed to come back and clean up both of those
Yeah.
pieces. I don't know, is that CDBG money? Or?
No, sir,
It is not?
It's our regular paving schedule, and that's going to be done the next few weeks.
Okay, very good, thank you. Yes, Dr. Wood?
So these are federal funds that come through Portsmouth and other cities.
Come through the city.
Right, okay. So now, when we give these funds to these different entities, are there any criteria on it as far as who they're contracting with, or do we just unilaterally give them funds without any criteria?
I don't know all the, there's a subrecipient agreement between the city and the agencies that receive funding. I don't know all the details of the criteria if it goes to the next step of how they're, if they're contracting. Most of the time, you're funding the agencies directly for service. So there's not a lot of supplemental contracting out of that nature. But we could look into that question.
So, for example, you were talking about Kroger and the parking lot. So Kroger received CB.
Well, no, in a case like that, this is where the city is taking the money and the city's actually doing, like the landscaping project on Frederick Boulevard, the city did the project. That wasn't,
Okay.
the funds were
You just
kept
used
internal.
Right.
And you'll see from last year, almost the majority of the funds were kept internal to the city for providing direct service or direct projects.
So what do you put out, an RFP or something?
There's a notice, and there's a HUD guideline on how you put the notice out for people to apply for that. So we comply with all the Fed requirements for doing notice. We actually hold a meeting in the city, advertised meeting for people who want to come down and ask questions or get additional information or learn how to submit applications. So there's a fair amount of outreach to meet the HUD requirements that we go through. It leads up to where we are tonight.
So the federal doesn't require you to report back how you and who you spent those funds?
Yes, they do. In fact, they've monitored us very closely. Very close monitoring. In fact, what you'll get after this, once you go through your budget public hearing process, we'll bring back to you an annual plan that you will adopt. And that is what goes back to HUD, and then HUD will review that plan. We're also linked with HUD so they can review how we spend the money. They keep track of where we spend it, how we spend it, how fast we spend it, to make sure we're complying with all their requirements. So it's a very close working relationship we have with the HUD office up in Richmond.
So what Mr. Cherry was requesting, you were asking for a printout of where we spent this over?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we can give that to you.
Because we have visibility of where the money's going, who's going to, and how.
Yeah, we can give you a status report of where we were on all the projects from last year, all of that. We track this it's one of the requirements we have. It's why there's money placed in there for the administrative fees, because we have a lot of requirements.
And Jeff runs that program, right?
And Jeff runs all of that.
Can we get that over a 5-year period?
I think, yes, sure. It's as much as we pull out this on the computers. We do track this very closely. Okay, so we went over this part of it. These are the sort of the services programs that we funded in mostly, in fact, in previous years they've been funded. The one change in this rites of passage program, you may remember last year we had Cheervention. These are Parks and Rec programs. This year they've taken that program out. They've replaced it with this rites of passage program. The funding amount remained the same in there. Well, these are primarily Parks and Rec run activities that are funded through CDBG funds. So it's about $200,000 of your $1.4 million there. This year, again, we're proposing to take, a lot of the funds that last year, recall we did sidewalks. We had funding in there for doing storm, for flood projects. We had funding in there for a variety of demolitions. We did a number of demolitions. I think Fred has demolished 8 houses using CDBG funds. That gives 4 more under contracts. We've been using those funds. This year, we basically bundle it all up based on council's priorities to get the Pines up and running, to make sure there's a funding source for doing. There's quite a bit of work, as you're aware, out there. So we're basically proposing the bulk of the funding go over here to park improvements at the Pines. We obviously have a list that's much greater than that, but that's, as you'll see, we put the whole budget together. It's about not quite at all you could get, but it's pretty close to maxing out this year. I think Brandon may want to speak to you about some of these other projects, the Healing Place in particular, as we move forward.
I
Yes,
thought
sir.
we had decided against the,
Well, what I did, I just found out today, you recall that that Healing Place project was a Hampton Roads regional project. And so all the major cities and even small towns and counties that are in the broader region had an allocation to contribute to that. I just found out today that 2 of the cities are not appropriating anything in their FY16 budget for it. So in my opinion, it wouldn't make any sense for us to appropriate anything there because they won't have enough to start the capital project in FY16. It doesn't mean we can't push it out, but if everybody else is not going along in FY16, that would be $82,000 that you could reallocate into the Pines or some other capital project that you like.
I mean, I think collectively, we're all in favor of that Healing Place. I think we just thought that location and us being the host city wasn't the right place, but we do want to make sure we fund that when everybody does get up and running.
They're looking at primarily Virginia Beach location.
Yeah.
So not this year, and we can add 82. We can make it 851 to the park.
Yes, ma'am.
Get those lights on that basketball court.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe get some HVAC in there. Okay. Remember a couple of other things we had last year that have been funded. The PHAC grant writing assistance that was funded last year. The Southampton Roads Task Force to End Homelessness, very small amount of funds there. And then of course the administration and planning piece. I'll just mention on the administration, obviously in that part of it, there's a fair amount of costs associated with our accounting requirements and reporting requirements. We keep a little bit of planning money in there. Just so you know, sometimes we might have a project that needs some planning work done. If you tie the planning money into the project and ultimately say the bids come back and you can't afford to construct the project, you get penalized for the money you spend on the planning if you don't go through with it. This is a section where we can put planning money. There's no penalty for using it. So the idea is we don't have a specific planning project to spend some of that money on, but you have a place to hold it, maybe like $50,000 or something for doing a planning project where you can do it without being penalized. What we don't want to do is do a planning exercise, find out you can't afford to do it, and then lose the funding.
Right.
So we've put a little bit of money in there. But there may be, as we go through the course of the year, we may want to come back and revisit some of this. You may have additional funds you could reprogram back into, for example, putting more money back into the Pines that might, as the course of the year goes by, and you also will get perhaps some additional program income. We're hoping during the course of the year you might have some additional funding that'll come up.
Yes, ma'am.
What in the world does $5,000 do for the Hampton Roads Task Force to end? That seems like nothing.
Well, that's the Planning
It's a
Council.
lofty goal. I just don't see what that does.
The Planning Council uses that and a similar allocation from each locality that I think is based on population.
So it's just as per capita to be a dollar figure?
Yes,
Okay.
to run the regional task force program.
Okay.
Which I speak at every year.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great thing.
Oh,
It
yeah.
just didn't seem like enough money to buy Coca-Cola.
They put ours together with about 20 other localities.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll very quickly run through the home program. This is a program that is a little bit more of a challenge for us to be able to execute finding a home for the funds, so to speak, a place to spend some of the funds. The home program, as is indicated there, primary purpose of providing decent housing to low-income households. So there's some ability to use the funds for that. The allocation is relatively small. It's about $336,000. That's the amount this year.
Who's executing that, Bob?
Right now, it's in the city's hands. There's really nothing to execute right at the moment. A lot of the, last year, you may remember we had some discussions with PRHA.
Right. So I was asking.
The programs that they were looking at using it, they've decided not to do. So they've kind of gotten out of
They're not doing
some of the
anything?
business. So there is no PRHA request in any of this. They did not make a request this year for either CDBG or home funds. I would say,
That's unusual.
Really?
and I would say that, as we move forward with the Lincoln Park, as an example, when we've got proposals from PRHA for some CIP funding, there may be an opportunity to sit down with PRHA and talk about maybe using some of the home funds, for example, to,
Because aren't they better equipped to do this than us?
excuse me?
Aren't they better equipped to do this than us?
Well, yeah, I think, that would be an organization that would be, it's really not our primary function.
That's their meat and potatoes.
That's-
Yeah.
Well, we need to have that conversation.
One of the issues, we are required to do a set aside for these CHODOs. There is no active CHODO for us to use. We're working with Habitat, and they simply don't have enough capacity to take on some of these functions. We do have to do a set aside, so there's money that's allocated sitting over there. There is no CHODO eligible for us to put money into, but that money will be held over there to meet HUD requirements to do the set aside.
So it can't be reprogrammed
That has to sit
for any other
for the
use?
CHODO. Yeah, it has to sit for the
What is,
CHODO.
what is that CHODO? What is that?
It's a community housing development organization. They provide housing opportunities. We've used them in the past to build housing for low-income home buyers.
And the organization has to go through a certification process to be certified as a CHODO in your locality for you to be able to deal with and allocate funds.
Right, and the issue we're having is not just Portsmouth. The region is having issues with trying to get enough capacity for doing the
It's
CHODOs.
just
And I think,
Habitat and PRHA that would even qualify, is that right?
well,
Or is
others
PRHA
could.
not a
Others
CHODO?
could. I mean, you could have nonprofits could
But I mean,
qualify
but
right now.
Right now.
Right
okay.
now. Well, that's something always to be explored, and I think HUD may be revisiting the program because it's having this kind of issue. There just aren't enough agencies out there with the capacity to do that. We do have some tenant-based rental assistance and to develop supportive housing units. You have funding set aside there. I don't know if we have anybody.
Yeah, that's the project. We're going to work with Virginia Supportive Housing, again, working on another regional SRO in Norfolk. We're going to work with the city of Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and us, and we're going to do another place like South Bay. And so for that $500,000, we're still sort of working out the details, but we'll probably get 3 to 4 SRO units out of that.
3 to 4. I thought the allocation was 15 per city. We build 60, and 15 of those are allocated for other cities, and the host city get the 45.
The total project is going to be 80 units. And so for our $500,000, we're going to get 3 to 4 units, SRO units.
In Virginia Beach.
No, they'll be in Norfolk.
Norfolk.
They have a site on Church Street.
Okay.
Do they have one in the
Yeah,
beach
that-
already?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
did.
and they're
I think
actually
they're going
developing
around.
another one that we did not participate in.
Right.
They don't have two.
Yeah.
Dr. Whitaker?
What are we doing marketing-wise and educationally to let organizations know about these funds and the process and what's needed to apply? What do we do with it?
Well, as I indicated, I mean, I'd let Jeff go into the details of what he does. But we follow the HUD requirements for putting out, information about the program availability and requirements for submitting applications, things of that nature.
I would think HUD probably has some minimal requirements.
Yeah, to become a CHODO, HUD regards a CHODO as a developer. And so they have to have both the capacity, personnel-wise and financially to be a developer. And the reality of it is, Home started in the 90s when they created this minimum set aside. Our home has been cut drastically, and the minimum set aside is still the same. The amount that we have to offer up to a CHODO is very minimal in terms of rehabbing or building a house. And so it's just very difficult with all these thresholds, and they actually tightened these thresholds over the past couple of years, particularly having this financial capacity to develop housing. And so it's very difficult for a small nonprofit to do it. And we've been working with Habitat now, Habitat of Southampton Roads for a couple of years, and they are a developer, and they're having, my experience with them is they're having struggles working with the federal dollars because there's just a whole lot of regulation, particularly from the home side of it. Before we can even put them under agreement for the dollars, they've got to show their capacity. They've got to show that they've got that they've looked at the market and they've identified that the market can absorb this, that they have buyers, and so it's just a whole lot of work. And so it's a struggle working with organizations to help them to become a CHODO.
Actually, I was speaking in general about the whole CDBG process.
In terms of CDBG and home, we annually, we touch base with everyone who we have funded in the past, and we do outreach to any other kind of organization. What I've learned here in Portsmouth is that this sort of nonprofit or community here in Portsmouth, it's somewhat small compared to other places that I've seen, and then again, when you start to get into working with HUD dollars, they need to have, our role in this is facilitation and technical assistance. They've got to be able to run a project if we grant them money, and usually, given again our resources, they have to have money in addition to our money. So we do work and try to do outreach, but it's, again...
Can you, when you get the information that Mr. Chair request, can you give us the outline as far as how you're outreaching and,
Sure.
and how you're doing it? Because many times an organization, if they're interested in pursuing it, they might can pull those resources together from other sources to do that. But if they don't know about the process and that it's available, then they wouldn't have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that's no problem. We can do that,
And I just mentioned, just to follow up on that, some of these programs were PRHA run in the past or more centralized over there, so we're just sort of taking them back in. We do have money in our administrative line item to do more outreach, more advertising. That's part of what capacity would be in there for using the money that's been proposed for that planning administrative line item.
Yeah, and also, I'll say education, because if parties have not been a part of that process, and it's
very
like walking
difficult.
into a dark room. So,
Sure, we can do that. It's very difficult. HUD has a lot of strings attached, and it requires a lot of effort for people to qualify and be able to be successful.
Can any of that CHOTO money be used for training? It seems like I recall the former CHOTO had a training program of some sort.
Annually, we can use, I think it's 5% for CHOTO capacity building. It has to be for a new CHOTO that wants to sort of incorporate to become a CHOTO. And so we can assist them with essentially CHOTO capacity building, but it needs to be a new CHOTO. We can't give the CHOTO capacity building money to, say, Habitat. We can give them CHOTO operating money to support them with essentially their administration, but capacity building needs to be a new CHOTO.
Okay.
Thanks.
So here's where we are. Next steps is your public hearings tonight. We'll come back with the annual action plan for you to consider May 12th after the public hearing's over. And then once it's adopted, we'll kick in July 1st, and that's when the new year will start.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, last question.
Yeah.
So when does this whole application period begin?
As far as
Or the awarding of the different funding under the...
when does it start normally? It
Right.
starts back early part of the year, like January, February timeframe. We start the process of taking an application, and it's also kind of a rolling thing too. We're always looking during the course of the year trying to find parties out there, since we are short on capacity with some of the neighborhood organizations, and so we're always looking, because quite frankly, during the course of the year, as some of this additional funding shows up, there might be opportunities out there. Even once you get into the past the July 1st start date, there may also be opportunities if there's funding available, or if others have been allocated funding, opt not to use it or return it, as has been the case in the past.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. Thanks, Bob. Okay. Next item.
All right, we're back on the budget. Following last night's meeting this morning, Councilman Cherry was kind enough to send me his outline of what his ideal budget plan was for next year, and I shared that with you along with a request that we talk about tonight. If that is the outline, if those are the rails that we're staying between, what are items that you want to, by consensus, say are sacred and which we can't use in cutting to that amount? And then also my other request was that you consider having a special meeting sometime next week so that we can, based on what we talk about tonight, have more time to develop a response within those parameters. Now, Mr. Cherry's, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your email this morning said the way you wanted to look at this was, I'm paraphrasing and abbreviating, but basically to reduce what's in the proposed budget by the equivalent of 15.85 cents, which would be equal to cutting 10.8 million out of the proposed budget. And then you also identified some things that you thought were sacred items. There were 6 of them: cemetery maintenance, veterans personal property tax exemption, the HRT increase, the community funding, the new assessor position, and the IT director. In other words, if I'm understanding you correctly, those things would not be available for us to cut out of that 10.8 million.
Yeah, that initial, that 11 point, I think it was 11.4, that was your,
Well, 11.24 was what was in that bottom line of non-school.
Page 8.
right,
Yes.
the non-school cuts. And those things were part of that cut that I suggested we put back, which brought it back down to 15.85.
Right.
Yeah, is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so, yeah, exactly.
So you're saying, if the converse of that is, you're willing to accept a tax rate increase that's 1.29 cents. So the difference between that and what we had built into this budget, which was 17 cents, is basically what we got to cut out of this budget.
Right. And if the council members want to juggle with those things around in there, that's fine. But we had nobody put anything else in, and those were what you had put in what you gave to us yesterday in your list, that 11.24. Yeah, and so you're exactly right. And that leaves the schools whole.
You did say there was or at least a majority of those present that said, don't mess with the schools.
Right.
I got that message.
That leaves school whole. That makes sure that our buses are still running to pick up whoever needs them, and that we get some key positions, a couple key positions too.
And so
I didn't have a problem with that as a baseline. I did wanted to make sure that we all, in the tweaking of the ones that Paige had mentioned, I actually agree with most of those items there, but some of these other items that we talked about, I think Elizabeth, you mentioned some of the other training and uniform and things like that. We wanted to make sure that we could do some horse trading, but we wanted to get a baseline first, and we wanted to see.
That's what I gave you.
And that's why I was okay with that being a rough baseline, and then we could kind of do some tweaking. Did we do the percentage cut across the board? Were we able to get something to?
I can do that, but if I heard a lot of different things about things that were sacred, so I can't give you an across-the-board amount until I know what I can't cut out to make up that $10.8 million.
So you want the council to tell you now what they don't want to cut out?
Right.
So you got my list. You got the schools plus
Those 6 items.
plus those things.
Okay, Bill?
I sent you an email earlier today, Brandon, about a program called ESCO.
Yes, sir.
Energy saving contracts. I know that we have some localities that have used that, and it goes back to the maintenance part. I think we were talking about, instead of cash funding that. Sounds like that program could use money already in our utilities fund for that, as well as the purchase of school buses, which represents, I think, close to $1 million.
Yes, sir.
In our budget. Have you had a chance to?
No, sir. I do know that we had some energy auditing done about 4 or 5 years ago. I didn't have a chance to talk to Dennis today, but that would be there's a possibility that, with the different facilities that we have online now, and with the different different levels of energy consumption, there may be some savings by doing that kind of an energy audit today. But like I said, we have done it before, but we haven't done it in a while.
Well, even with the school bus piece, that sounds like a creative way to avoid a big hit in the budget. If we have some localities doing that, they're doing it for a reason. And I understand it's really saved them being able to amortize that expense out within the utility fund, which is allowable. So I think it's something, if there's concurrence there, we at least need to take a look at it and see, because the roof maintenance and the maintenance projects and the school bus deal, I think that's, $5 million, close to. So I think
Combining all of those?
Yeah, combining all of those, we definitely need to look into it.
Okay. Well, if you give us some time, we'll report back to you
Okay.
when we have the next work.
Yeah, and I'm in favor of the extended time to do just that and some other things.
And and back to your original question, Brandon, just to make sure we're clear on, you want us to provide you with things that we don't want to cut
Yes, sir.
out of this baseline structure that we propose, or what Paige proposed, and so at what point are we going to do the tweaking? Because, I mean, some of these things like the closure of the Manor Branch Library, I'm not in favor of that. And this isn't a whole lot of money to be dealing with, but I want to know where we are with the Delta piece, or the Delta in the dollars, because again, I think I drove home enough last night that I think the potential monies that we have in the sheriff's budget for extra local appropriations to be able to bring over to cover some of these things. So I don't want us to go into this thing saying we're going to close a library or we're going to do something, and we're sitting over here with what potentially could be a couple of $1 million that we could reprogram over to cover some of these things.
Well, since
So
we
that's what I'm
factored
saying.
some of those things into that, that 11 cent cut, if you tell me I can't factor them in, then I've got to cut somewhere else. So that's why I need you to tell me what's sacred and what's not.
Because the jail piece is in there. I think that 400.
Yeah, that's just the 400. I'm
Yes,
talking
sir.
about
You're talking the other money.
the other additional money, the excess
Like-
positions, and all of those other
And
things.
we got to keep the mosquito guy.
Right, that's
So-
right.
so-
And that's what I'm saying. And,
If there's-
and when you
yeah,
look into
those kind of
the
things.
extra positions and the extra funding now, it's just not fair to cut those other programs out, and they're over here with some potential opportunities.
When
to-
are we getting the local component report from
Yeah,
the sheriff?
did you get that breakdown for the sheriff's department tonight, like we asked? The $6.5 million local piece, and where is it each going?
I don't have that unless we were able to get it in the last couple of hours, Judy.
It's not going to be one item or whatever, it's just a percentage of the revenues cover, the state revenues to the total cost of the sheriff's budget. So those local costs are actually part of every single line item.
I understand that, and we just wanted to know what they were, because, again, if the state comp board says he should have 161 positions, and we're funding 189 positions, then that's 20-something positions there that we need to get answers for. Where are those 20 people? And then if we're not complying with our agreement from the regional jail, and we've got 40 beds that are not being utilized, and we're paying that extra money, then that means we got 40 additional folks over in our local jail, which means we got additional people in the local jail working that we don't really need to be funding. I mean, so it's kind of a snowball piece, because if those folks were over in the regional jail where we're already making the assessment payments, then we wouldn't be experiencing a cost over here on this side. I mean, so it's and I don't know what the state gives us ratio-wise, how many inmates to a deputy, but if we're averaging 40 people that he's not sending over to the regional jail, I want that, not only that money removed, but the other monies where the individuals that make up to that removed in there, and then an explanation of where these additional 28 people are and what
That's the
functions
key
are they
piece, I
serving.
think. You want to know where the 100% local funded positions are.
Right.
And then also how much how much of the local funding is going towards supplements. I think
Right,
that,
right.
and I can get you that by your next meeting.
Okay, and I don't mind having a special meeting. I mean, I hope council doesn't mind that. I mean, this is, is that important that we make sure we do that. But again, we need to know where those folks are. I mean, we've got 28 people additional than what the state comp board says he should have. And again, yes, sir. I'm sorry, Ms. Simmons was next.
Thank you.
You're just right next to me, right?
You're right. I know. I'm invisible. Couple of things. One, I think I'm the one that said last night, could we please all send Brandon a message on what our desires and wishes are, and Mr. Cherry's the only one that actually did that. Unfortunately or fortunately, I have another job that takes some of my time too. I would still like to do that because I couldn't support your cuts as they are. I am still of a mind to phase in educational cuts. I am still of a mind to not cut any of these public safety situations, not only for the safety of the officers, but of our citizens. Some of the cuts into the vacancy savings that have to do with public safety positions, I'm not interested in cutting. I'd like to have a lot more badges on the street than less. So I'd like a little more time to compose that, to share with everyone. I'm all for having another meeting next week. This is too important. All that information about the sheriff and the comp board and what the state requires that we the city, do pay. Right. I think I can recall having a similar conversation as we completed the new courthouse just before you came in as mayor. And when the council agreed to additional deputies because of additional security requirements, a larger building, more sally ports, transportation. And I know, I can't prevent it now, and it's not my job to, but I know there are specific requirements. The state says the city must pay this, and this. There are costs in the jail that are set, in the city jail that are set, whether they're 221 people or 275 people, it doesn't make any difference. It's a flat cost. So whether there are 40 people there or not, doesn't really make any difference, except to what the state sends us, Portsmouth, for housing those people versus the state sending the regional jail. Right. I did try to make some contact with Carol today to try to get some of those numbers, but if Brandon can provide those to us, I want to see those again, because I think we'll learn a lot if we see the real numbers.
Right. Well, that was the reason why I asked that. I mean, if we got
there ain't no $6 million, I can tell you that.
Right, but if we got 189 positions and we're funding $6.5 million on a local map, it is our responsibility to know what those people are doing and what jobs and functions they have. Because again, the comp board says this, and this is enough to be able to do what his function is. If we as a locality say, yeah, we want to do some other things, then yeah, we bear that burden, but it is our job to ask where these layers are.
They didn't tell us to build that courthouse with 3 sally ports and all that.
That's right. That's right. And so that's why if we know that breakdown, yeah, Dr. Wood.
No, I just want to make sure we're clear that when you say supplement, that's the transportation, security, and the positions. There were 3 areas that were mentioned yesterday that $6 million covers.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And salary supplements.
Right, and
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, to Vice Mayor Simmons's point, I think when the new jail opened, we agreed as a council, at least the council at that time, there were 18 positions that we added to facilitate the need for additional security.
The
courthouse.
What would I say?
Said jail.
Jail.
Yeah.
Well, they're
Working on it.
They're being.
Hold that thought.
But when the new courthouse opened, the $80 million courthouse, if you may, we funded those 18 positions for the need of additional security there. Also, I believe, council, back when the economy tanked and the regional got in some, lost their federal inmates, which was a source of revenue for them, I believe if you look back, council made a decision to forego some per diem to the regional jail. And that's not in our regional jail agreement. That's something we did up and beyond that. I think we need to look at that legislation and look at rescinding that. They're not in financial straits now, we are. and we need to look and capture that per diem back in Portsmouth.
I think that's
ver-
over
versus-
$700,000.
Versus the regional jail, and that is significant. I don't have the exact figure, Vice Mayor, but we need to find out what the figure is, and we need to undo what we did back in, I think, 2010. So.
I'm not opposed to any of that. That's why I'm saying we need to lay all of this out, because to just say, I need 15 more guys to do this because of this, and I need 2 more guys over here, before you know it, you got 20, 30 extra people over there that are not being funded by the state, and we don't know where they are, and nobody wants to ask the questions of where they are. And I'm saying, if we're going to make cuts down to the bone, it is our responsibility to know if that thing is working like it is, and we need a response from not only the sheriffs, but from staff as to that funding, where it is, and how it's being allocated. And if we get all that and look at that, as well as the agreement with the regional jail, you better believe it. I want to see all that stuff.
Well, to that point, who are we communicating with? I think having this conversation, I don't think anybody at this table can run a courthouse or a jail. I think the sheriff is charged with doing that. Are we communicating with his finance person?
Last week, but that's been last week. I have not communicated this week, but last week, Colonel Jamoki and Anna and Bill Rucker and the sheriff met with me.
So they will be at the table with you to
Yes.
get ground.
Yes.
We got to be grounded in
Yeah.
the real numbers, not just off the head, pie in the sky numbers.
And that's exactly what we're asking from him. He get that information from them and lay it out so we can see exactly where these folks are and whether or not we want to continue something or whether or not we got questions with it. Yep, Mr. Meeks next, and then Dr. Whitaker.
Brandon, what is the per diem per day that we're getting from the state, do you know?
For the city jail?
Yes.
Let me look to Judy on that.
The per diem varies whether they're considered a local inmate or a state inmate, and that depends on, I guess, the charges. So there's a $4 local, $12 state.
So average of 8.
Yes.
Average 8. And what are we getting charged for regional jail? $56 or $58?
That's our cost, yes, sir.
And then what happens is we're foregoing the per diem to the regional.
The state go ahead.
The per diem is awarded where the prisoner is housed.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, Dr. Whitaker.
Yeah, that's true. None of us know how to run a jail or courthouse, but I wasn't on council when the decision was made as far as the additional amount that council is paying. Now, the judges, that's their building. Was there any supplemental documentation submitted from the judges indicating they needed all of this additional service over there to support what was being recommended?
The sheriff is charged with maintaining security in the courthouse.
Right, but I mean,
the judges.
But I'm saying, but was there any support from the judges on that?
They just gave us an order for a courthouse.
So there wasn't.
They don't get involved in
no, I'm just asking
security.
I would think that's their building that they would have had some input.
But the state does dictate that for a circuit court, how many deputies should be there versus juvenile and domestic, and based on that formula and based on the data he's gonna bring us back, we ought to find out very easily whether or not we got enough people to do that, and if we got more than enough, then that's the part I'm trying to get to.
Right.
Yes, sir. You still got the floor.
No, that's all.
Okay.
Plus, we had a lot of other things added to this court that we weren't expecting. That's why some of the men were sent there, the extra employees were sent there, because they needed more to manage the vast things that had gone into the building and security of that courthouse.
Okay. All right.
One thing I need to bring up.
Yes, sir. You get the floor.
Is when we talk about these vacancies and we start, whatever this body decides to do, and it only takes 4. When you start adjusting the sheriff's budget, you need to take in consideration the workforce that he gives the trash and some of these other services that he gives the community that's no charge to the city. If it's 25 people, I think it's around $1.2 million. So we take those vacancies away. When Brandon's got to lean to hire people because the sheriff takes his inmates away, there's not going to be no vacancies.
That's exactly why we want to do an analysis instead of keep talking about we got people helping and everybody want to throw numbers out that we're saving. And if you go to the sheriff, he'll bring you a whole bunch of more numbers that he's saving. We need to see that and we need to validate those numbers. We don't want everybody showing up with their own numbers and their own rationale. That's why we need you to go through that and make sure that those numbers jive up through finance. And then if we get that, then I'm perfectly happy. But I don't need anybody giving me commentary on they helping us and on the truck and all that. We know that. Yeah. And we know that free is not free.
Right.
Okay? Every time we get free service, we paying for 3 or 4 deputies to hang around with the free people, and we forget to mention that. So it's not free. Yes, Vice Mayor.
One of the cuts I don't like that was in there was the closure of Willett Hall. And I don't know if I'm supposed to know, but most people know that we did get an unsolicited proposal some months ago from an operator who was interested in taking over Willett Hall and managing it and all. And I wonder if it might be a time to revisit that concept.
We at least need to be aware of what that proposal was. I don't know about anybody here, but I haven't seen the proposal or had any details shared. Mayor, I think it'd be good if we look at
That'd be good. We oddly enough, I spoke to the Chamber of Commerce for a couple of weeks ago at the breakfast, and the person that submitted the bid was there, and we had the manager and some of the staff there, and we actually went through that whole process, and I think he got a feedback from staff, and I think we can get a briefing, Brandon, on what that was. And again, because somebody want a city asset doesn't mean
it might have been wrong. It just comes to mind.
And like we shared with him, that might be still a good idea, but maybe the way he presented it and some of the things that are in there from a oversight perspective, that probably wasn't presented correctly. So I think we asked him to get back and see if there was some feedback you could give him that if they wanted to resubmit or do something else, but we can't help them send in those non-solicited, because then you're showing favoritism.
Right. I spoke to him today because he called me, and I suggested that he follow the PPEA policy.
Okay.
You adopted an ordinance that gives some very specific steps for submitting a proposal, and I suggested that he do that. And I know just from my conversation with Mike Hammonds, our procurement manager today, it's not a good idea for council to get involved in the initial proposal. So before I bring that to you, I would ask you to consult with your legal counsel on what's in that ordinance and make sure it's okay to do that before you do it. But I don't think it's okay for council to see that at this stage. But I did talk to Fred, and I said, follow the policy and as far as a submission, and he said he would do that.
Okay. And before we leave that point, one of the things we talked about at the chamber meeting with several businesses is that there are great opportunities for public-private partnerships, and we're interested in those types of things, but it's got to be something that the public and the taxpayers benefit, not just the private entity. And because of things like this Midtown Tunnel, which is tied to a public-private partnership, people look at that and get a negative tone, and that's not the case. I mean, I'm looking for partnerships with not just Willett Hall, the golf course, and some of the other things that the private sector could probably do a lot better than what we're doing. But that doesn't mean we want to just take those assets and turn them over to somebody just because he was the one submitted it. So, I mean, there's some due diligence and some things we as a council and as a city need to make sure that we're having oversight of again. Did we touch everything on that? And there is a process, and when someone does submit, we as a council can't be talking to them and all of those types of things because of potential conflict. Yeah, Mr. Meach?
Can I get some insight on number 19, Brandon, please? But some of these grants are hundreds of thousands of dollars.
They are. There are not a lot that apply to city operations.
Okay.
And the few that I got a notice about through, being networked to eCivis, were not applicable to city operations. They were applicable to a lot of stuff that I do with Healthy Portsmouth, a lot of stuff I do with nonprofits and homeless services, but
Not directly to the city.
and so we really did not utilize that service, and it just didn't justify continuing the service.
What about the number 28, the DNA? I think that was something that Fred was jockeying.
It's just a reduction in the contract line,
How many you on? What line are?
28.
28.
Oh, 28.
debris and demolition. We've taken a pretty aggressive stance this fiscal year.
Correct.
We could ramp that back significantly and save that amount in next year's budget.
Number, let's see here, 17, federal lobbyists. We have a state lobbyist that does a fantastic job. I'm not certain that a federal lobbyist, especially the naming of a ship, in fact, I suggested that we apply for that, but I don't think we need to have a lobbyist on the payroll to further that. I think we're capable of communicating with our federal delegation to get that done. So that's an expense I would say we could do without.
You also belong to the National League of Cities, so through that collective group, you have lobbying power in Washington.
Sure.
I mean, for $30,000, we can send Sherry to Washington for 2 weeks in the Willard. Really. Wouldn't you like to do that? Yeah.
Don't book that yet.
Okay, and let me just ask in general. I know we created, Brandon, in the last couple of years, departments, the new neighborhood stabilization or DNA department from planning. Are there any opportunities from a synergy standpoint of combining that stuff back? I mean, besides having two directors there, are there any savings there?
Not unless you eliminate positions. We didn't add positions in the creation of these departments. We just restructured the supervision of those functions.
Okay. And, okay.
What appears a little, well, maybe, the thing about that is, where's the building inspector work?
Where does he work?
Yeah, I mean, who's he work? Aren't they in the same, he's in the same area as DNA? Is he in?
Yes,
So who does he?
to the
Report to-
director of the Department of Neighborhood
So he
Advancement.
reports to the DNA, right?
Fred shaking his head.
They report to you?
This is Nita's area. Excuse me. Maybe we should let Nita answer that question.
Building official and DNA are separate.
Okay,
The
so
building official and DNA are separate. The building
does he
official,
report to you?
yes, they both
They just sit in the same space, so to speak?
same floor, opposite ends of the same floor.
Yeah, okay. So are there any duplications in, I just asked because I know I went to get a building permit and I had to go see both DNA and the building official. So I'm just a little, how that works. So is a duplication, is that something can be, which is what I think the mayor was
Well,
getting
that's
at.
my whole drive with the whole organizational structure. The duplications are we gaining anything with that? Are we gaining anything with having deputy city managers and another layer of folks reporting up to them? Are we that size of a city? Are we? I mean, seriously, that's the types of things we need to be looking at, because if you can run the city with all of your deputies running your departments, then why do we have these other layers of folks? And I'm sure you guys are good at what you do. I'm not, again, we don't want to get into personnel, but from a structural standpoint, is all of that necessary? I know we had over in the compound, we created a director of general services, we created a director of utility services, and I mean, do we need all that?
There's
Then
always
we got
been-
some deputy directors, which I
There's always
think.
been a director of utilities.
Now, the building official though is mandated, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we have to have.
So you gotta have a
yes.
building official.
Yeah, gotta have one of them.
So you can't mess with that, but
There you go, talking about that building official. Don't do that. Right?
maybe we should move to another topic.
And I think what we've gained in the last year has been a focus on neighborhoods. And we can revisit the organization.
Yeah, no,
I don't
not
think we're
questioning
going
on
to.
the-
I don't think you're going to see a fiscal impact on that. You know, I don't think you're going to be able to say, well, we can cut $50,000 out of the organizational part of that. You know, you see the items that you asked for that Fred proposed, which are actually contract services. I mean, that's the way you're going to achieve some real savings in FY16. But we can certainly revisit how that is structured.
I mean, I thought before I came on board and we did the efficiency study, which is why I mentioned last night, we probably need to do that again. A lot of these positions that we've now somehow have now were deemed not necessary then, and we got rid of those. And now we're back with, how many deputy directors that we have now? Because I understand we didn't have any of those. Now all of a sudden we've got 2 or 3 deputy directors. I mean, I don't want to make it seem like I'm just picking on the sheriff. We got to pick on you too. What are these people doing? And if those positions aren't needed, we need to find something else for them to do. I mean, we got to do more with less, and we don't want to create all these slots and have all these people here just because they're available slots. If we don't need deputy directors or deputy managers or whatever you call them, we need to move them folks over doing something that, you know. And if it's a savings there, fine. If we need a director with all these folks, then I'm fine with that. But I don't want to make it seem like I'm just, and because I utilize the sheriff because I want to know some of those numbers in there that wasn't jiving up to me. But I want to do the same thing to our staff and our department because
We can provide you with a list of departments that have assistant directors and whether or not those have been newly created positions or they've just been filled that were previously
We
vacant.
said last night, we all agreed the efficiency study was a good idea.
Yeah,
To renew.
and hopefully we can partner with the
This right here.
Yeah.
schools in doing that.
Motion.
Yeah.
What is it? No, I need to get that.
You don't have that?
Yeah, I need to look up. Yeah, Ms. Moody?
Line 78, monument restoration. Could be a savings of $73,183. I don't know what in the world that would consist of. We have the Confederate monument down there, and those guys hadn't moved in a long time. We've got some cannon around, but seems like to me that's a large sum of money that we could probably forgo that for a year.
That's why it's in there. It's a deferred maintenance.
Okay.
There are a lot of monuments in the city, and Nancy, as the museum director, is tasked with scheduling and prioritizing which ones are maintained each year with the refurbishment.
But Brandon, all these things we're asking about now are in that 11.24. So what he really needs, because what I sent him today includes all that.
He needs the don'ts.
He needs the don'ts.
Need the don'ts.
What you're asking about now is already in 11.24 that I sent him this morning.
That's why I asked for a little more time.
Right.
If
Send that.
So he
you
needs
want
to know
to.
what you don't want to do.
If you want to give me those, I mean, ideally, the next couple of days would be better so that we're not getting to the special meeting next week and still trying to make a
And
calculation.
when is that special meeting, please?
That's up to you guys.
Yeah.
Fine with
Can we get a census on the libraries?
And
No, we're not going to do that.
what's available? What's good? What's Tuesdays?
Put it in.
Want to try to shoot for Tuesday of next week? Is that good?
That works for us.
Fine with me.
Tuesday the 5th. We have the police department memorial at 2 o'clock.
What time?
2 o'clock.
We'll be back now.
What about
Tuesday?
the special
Tuesday at
meeting?
2 at St. Mark's is the fallen officer memorial.
Okay.
It'll be done by 5.
That's at 2.
Oh, yeah.
Do here at 5 o'clock here.
Let's come at
Yeah.
5 so we can get going.
Okay.
Okay.
And so the don'ts, as you accurately summarize them, the soonest you can start emailing me those, and I can, at least by electronic submission, determine what a consensus is, the better. That would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's 6 o'clock.
okay, 6 o'clock. Anything else?
6 o'clock what? Is that what time you meeting?
All right, no, I think it's 6 o'clock now.
Oh, okay.
Make sure we've flushed out each one of these. I did notice one thing here, Brandon, looking at your cuts, and that's why I wanted it by department, so I could make sure everybody was sharing in the load here. I don't see anything here with anything that finance, it may be giving up, or procurement. Is I overlooked that, or
You didn't know.
No, sir, you didn't.
there's nothing in there they can give?
No, sir.
Okay.
But we will go back, now that I've got a directive with a specific amount, we'll go back in every department.
We want to touch everybody.
We will.
Yeah.
What it is, that finance position for the minority contracting.
That's right.
That was in there on the
But
finance.
that would be
Yeah,
the
right.
procurement
Okay.
position, which was a new position.
We don't have somebody already on staff that can do that job?
We've put a pretty big load on our one procurement manager right now, and this is a reason that contracts are slowed down, and I think the idea about adding another position was to be able to address the additional compliance piece with whatever the policy is that comes out of the disparity study.
Sounds like a job for-
That's not going to create additional bureaucracy, is it? Is that person going to need an assistant, and the assistant going to need
Just recommending one.
He's a
courier?
deputy director.
Yeah.
and, right,
Can
and
we
then
not
another
share that
manager.
person with the
Right.
school board? I mean, if we have somebody that's expert in that
Brandon,
field.
Aren't there a couple people working there other than procurement, other than Mike?
There are. He's the procurement manager. There.
But it's couple other people in there who can assist this new position in Mike. 'Cause I don't know what they do if anything, but
And Elizabeth, the vice mayor just brought up something that, could we share that person with the school board? Have a shared expense? Something to look into.
I mean, I would imagine that's a kind of specialized purchasing person.
If contracts are contracts.
I think too, you might want to wait till the study, because there are going to be recommendations coming out of the study.
Yeah, but once it gets past that, then it's just compliance with the regs. Whether with a school contract or a city contract, I would think.
I would wait.
Something to think about.
Yes, sir.
All right. Anybody else? Anything else for the good? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.
I'd say.
Okay.